A lot of good marriages need to be more in the maybe zone. A lot of us approach sex as a yes, it's happening, or no, it's not happening. But I like to think of it more like dimmers on a dimmer, like a dimmer light switch.
Mm-hmm.
It's not on or off.
You're listening to Get Your Marriage On, the fun and spicy podcast bringing you new tools and fresh ideas so that you can be the sexiest couple you know.
For this week's episode, we continue a Q&A session with Jenny Rose about sex and intimacy. Jenny is a lifestyle influencer. She asked some questions from our audience that I tackle in last week's episode and this week's episode, such as, what to do when you lose your erection during sex? How do you balance time with yourself and with your spouse when you feel touched out at the end of the day? How to transition from mommy mode to wife mode? What to do with mismatched sex drives, toys, frequency, pregnancy, and many other wonderful questions. Anyway, let's jump back in where we left off last week.
How can women balance intimacy when at the end of the day, she might be feeling, quote unquote, touched out? And
Yes.
can 100% relate to this when the kids were little and you're breastfeeding and there's always a baby on you and a toddler pulling on you and you're just like, I just don't want anybody to touch me.
No, not at all. Yep. Be realistic.
Yeah.
I think we don't give our wives or women don't give themselves enough transition time. I work in an office away from home. It's only a 7-minute drive home, so it's really short. But I get 7 minutes of transition time from work dad mode to daddy mode or husband mode. So I get transition time. But my wife, who has the privilege of being at home with our kids, she doesn't get transition time. It's constant. So she's touched constantly. So transition time, you need transition time. You can't go from being touched all day, nursing all day, kids hanging off of you all day, and all of a sudden want to be sexy. It's not realistic. Is it a bath that gets you in the mood? Is it Netflix and chill? Is it what is it that helps you transition? So make time for transition.
I love that transition time. And I feel like you were talking about, you get the drive home and that is a great time for a decompressing moment or whatever. But even for people that aren't taking that time in the car on their way home, it's a good reminder, hey, get off your phone, talking to whoever you're on the phone with, have a moment to pray or let go of the things that were bothering you with the coworker at work, because otherwise they too missed out on their transition time.
Yes.
And now they're coming home and they're bringing home all of that stuff and putting it onto their spouse who's already had a day,
Yes.
And it's okay, they both needed some moments of transition time.
Yes.
And that's a bunch of missed opportunities, Oh,
I want to say one more thing about that. A lot of women carry a mental load. Men do too, but we're going to talk about the women here in this context just right now. This mental load is like the never-ending list of stuff that needs to get done, but it's invisible. The husband doesn't see it. It's because it's only in her head. There's a story about a well-intentioned husband wanted to give his wife a break. So he told her, Saturday morning, I got the kids. You go to the gym or whatever you want to do. So she does. She leaves. He makes a waffle breakfast for the kids. He cleans up. He's doing the dishes, thinking he's earning all these points as a husband, being a good husband. And she comes home and, she's grateful to see, the kids are taken care of and the kitchen's clean, but she sees the science project still undone on the counter. And they have to take care of it that day because tomorrow's Sunday. They have other things going on. Family's coming in Monday. It's due Tuesday. So today's the day. That didn't get done. And then she sees these other things around the house that need to get done. So her going to the gym, all it did was it just delayed the stress. It didn't actually alleviate her stress. And he didn't realize that. So a good couples, if they can work together, is to identify areas in their marriage, in their working life together, where he can like delegate huge chunks of things. Like if it comes down to school projects, he is always in charge of that. So she doesn't have to think about it or worry about it anymore. Or the groceries or the laundry or whatever it is, like find big chunks and just delegate that and have him completely like beginning to end. And he might do it differently than she would. He might load the dishwasher differently than she would, but she needs to let go because, for instance, if that's the case, like that's how you work together as a couple to lighten her invisible, never ending load. That helps you transition so much better when you have less of a mental load, like weighing you down.
And the spouse that tends to have that invisible load is also a good reminder that asking for help is hey.
Yes, ask for help. Ask for help.
I think my husband and I kind of bounce back and forth. It's like sometimes he has more on his plate and sometimes I feel like I have more on mine. I tend to ask for help. I don't have an issue with that, but he tends to think that I think that's being more vulnerable and thinking that he can't handle all of it. And so oftentimes I'll say like, well, what can I do for you? Like, what can I take off your plate? And oh, nothing. Like I've got it. Like, it's fine, but he's totally not fine.
You need to learn to delegate.
An encouragement to those people, those spouses out there that are like, oh no, I got it. It's fine. Tell the other spouse what you need help with. I am begging you, because it makes such a difference. We don't know.
Love it. That's good.
Okay, the next question kind of breaks my heart a little bit, but I'm sure that there are lots of people that are going through this and they need to know, how do you rebuild or repair intimacy after a big break in trust?
Yeah, sometimes you're just going to need outside help. Like you go to an emergency room for a medical emergency. So in this case, you might need to call a trained marriage therapist that deals with major trust issues and treat him like the ER doc. And an emergency room doctor, their job is to get you stabilized and then prepare you for long-term care. But immediately we're going to help like staunch the bleeding, repair whatever, and stabilize you. And that's what a good therapist can do. They can help stabilize things when everything feels so upside down after a major breach of trust. I've known lots of marriages that have had major breaches of trust, but they work through it. And now they're stronger as a result on the other end, because they had a lot of bad habits that led them to that point. So they had to unlearn the bad habits and through the repair process form good habits. I read some statistic like 80% of couples that have had an affair like end up still staying together after working through it. So it's very possible that this is just like the breach of trust is a symptom of a greater problem that's been going on kind of maybe underground in your marriage, and it finally like broke through. So you need to kind of address that. So that's what I would say on that one.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And even if the person doesn't want to go to see a counselor, would you suggest just allowing the other person to go on their own?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Start there and see where it goes.
Yeah.
Counselors get a bad rap, and just like any profession, pick any profession. You're going to have great people that are at it and bad people. There are good plumbers and bad plumbers. There's good computer programmers and bad computer programmers. There's good therapists and bad therapists. So not all therapists are equal. So sometimes they get a bad rep because someone had a bad experience in the past with someone that was not as helpful for them. So you kind of need to, find a good one and work with them. But that's what I would recommend.
Totally. I agree. What do you do when you feel you are the only one initiating sex? Is there a way to have the other spouse pursue you without feeling like you are begging?
Ah, yes. The begging is so unsexy, isn't it? All right. Okay. I would say the most important thing in this instance is to work on handling yourself better. How are you showing up when you're frustrated? How are you showing up when you feel like you've been the only one initiating? And what do you make that to mean? Do you make that to mean that, do you make that to mean that your spouse is not as invested in your marriage as you are? or not as invested in your happiness? Or do you make it mean that there's other things going on? So the more clear you can get on the meaning behind the lack of initiation on the other part really helps, because it's perfectly realistic and possible that it's nothing personal. It's nothing against you. It could be that they've never really learned how. They have a confidence issue. They or like that person we talked about earlier about they just don't think about food until food is brought to them and all of a sudden they're hungry. Like they just don't think about sex, and that's just the way they tend to be. That's their pattern. It doesn't excuse them for not initiating, but really get down deep. What's the meaning? And then when you're not getting what you want in your marriage, how do you show up? Do you become an ogre? Do you start controlling? Do you start pouting? Do you start withdrawing? Like those behaviors are like because you want to punish your spouse. Those don't help solve the problem at all. It just reinforces the behavior that they're doing. And then all of a sudden you're kind of in this downward spiral. So I think it's perfectly fine to express your disappointment. You say, I am really disappointed that you don't initiate. I've initiated all this time. I make this to mean that you're not interested in me or you don't find me attractive. I don't know if that's the case, but this is what I'm dealing with. And I just want to express to you that I'm really disappointed. But you're not going to try to control or manipulate the other person. And that's also what a good grown-up and a good friend would do. Like if your friend said something that kind of was doing something that you didn't quite disagree with, you wouldn't punish your friend. You'd express your disappointment in their choice, but you won't like punish them for that. We got to do that to our spouses. We got to be good friends. So there's a lot of things what I recommend what not to do. Like I talked about pressuring and try to be controlling, but please express your disappointment and don't give up on, okay, here's another problem. I see a lot of couples where one is initiating all the time, the other isn't, and they get so sick of initiating. They're like, fine, I'm fed up. From now on, sex is all up to you. We'll just have it when you want to do it on your schedule. I will stop initiating. And kind of stubbornly refuse to stop initiating, thinking that will solve the problem. All that does is shift the pressure of initiating clearly on the other person. And when there's a lot of pressure and stress, does that increase or decrease your libido? It decreases it. So it makes the problem worse. So a month might go by, 2 months might go by, and the person that used to initiate all the time is finally fuming like, wait a minute, I thought by me stop initiating, there'd be a void, a vacuum, and my spouse will step up to fill the vacuum. And it's not happening. So they get even more frustrated. So that doesn't really help. All you're doing is shifting the problem, the pressure from one to the other. And it's just causing the problem. So the non-initiating spouse, the only way to solve this is the non-initiating spouse to step up and start initiating. He or she will have to start to really be honest with themselves, look at things as they really are. Why is it that I don't initiate? Is it because I don't know how? Is it because I'm not confident? Is it because I don't think about sex? Like all those things you can work on, all those things you can set an alarm on your phone. Like you can do things to really do it and push yourself to do it. And it would be really good for your development. It'd be good for your marriage. But the bigger issue is how you handle your disappointment and make sure you deal with that in a healthy way, not an unhealthy way.
And is it reasonable when you're sharing your frustration in a kind way to even ask the spouse who's not initiating to ask them and say, if we're having sex once a week, in the course of a month, I would love it if you initiated 2 times out of the month.
Yeah.
Like, is it reasonable to give them like a number to reach towards?
Sure. Of course. Work together on that. I know a couple where they have a baton system. They have a token and like he'll initiate, they'll have sex, and then he gives her the baton. Now it's up to her. And their rule is 72 hours. So within 3 days, she has to initiate. And then after they have sex, she gives him the baton. Now it's up to him for 72 hours. And that worked for them. I don't know if it'd work in my marriage, but that was like a system that worked well for them. And after 72 hours, if she hasn't initiated, he'll like, you dropped the ball. What's going on? Like you dropped the baton here. You got to step up. And it goes back and forth. And I guess they're very good at handling each other in their marriage. So that works for them. But yeah, work on a system if that's what it takes. Yeah, work
Yeah.
on a minimum to keep your marriage vital and moving forward. But it takes both people to initiate for a good marriage.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be equal, but both people do need to initiate.
Yes. Because don't you feel like it just ties back into feeling like you're desirable?
If you make it to mean that, yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
For some couples, they probably don't care if the guy's in this stereotypical, if the man's always initiating, it's okay because that's just the way it goes and they're okay. They don't make it mean that
Right.
he's undesirable. But if you make it mean that, then yeah, you need to address it.
Yes. Okay. One person wrote in, do other wives feel pressure to have sex even when they're too tired? So this goes into the whole begging that we were kind of just talking about. But I also feel like we need to address the too tired syndrome as well.
Yes. So first thing I'd say, it's a mistake though to think that if I give him an inch, he's going to take a mile. Like we think that so what they'll think then says, well, I can't kiss my husband passionately because if I start that, it's going to get him aroused and that will lead to sex. And I am not in the mood to sex. You got to remind yourself that you have the right to say no and stop any point in the process. Like, we forget that. You can withdraw your consent, so to speak, at any point, and that's how you do healthy marriages. So yeah, sure, you can kiss him passionately or even touch him and get him aroused and then stop, because that's as far as you're willing to go. I think a lot of good marriages need to be more in the maybe zone. A lot of us approach sex as a yes, it's happening, or no, it's not happening. But I like to think of it more like dimmers on a dimmer, like a dimmer light switch. It's not on or off. It's, you want to be able to move into a maybe. Another way to think about it is like in a manual or in a car with the transmission, you have, first gear, second, third, fourth, fifth gear. First gear might be like, I'm not in the mood. Fifth gear is let's go. And a really, like, I'm talking to the husbands mostly here, but most husbands are probably in gear 3. they're pretty much ready to go, maybe a lot of times, and their wife is more like at a 1. But you approach your wife as if she's at a 3. So it feels like pressure, like, because he's at a 3 and he assumes she would be at a 3 too. But if you can, a wise husband would rather, and this goes both ways, but a wise husband will go, you're at a 1. Let's work at getting you from a 1 to a 2. And so the pressure is more affectionate touch. It's conversation. It's like, how was your day? Can I hold you? Like, or whatever those more level 1 type things do to get to a level 2. And then when you're at a level 2, you can talk about getting to a level 3. And you don't have to, it's not like you have an agenda to get her to a 5, but you're going to work to get her to the level where she's at and kind of move more into the maybe space. And sex may not happen tonight, but it will more likely happen the next encounter because you're kind of more in this maybe. It's really important about pressure. Pressure is like brake or like the parking brake in your car. You can drive your car with a parking brake engaged. It's possible. It's not going to be very good for the car. So if there's a lot of pressure and you're still pushing to have sex, it has a big dampening effect. It doesn't help with the marriage. It's not going to go great. So the best thing you can do is learn how to release that parking brake. Is it touch? Is it talk? Is it, sometimes it's time alone. Sometimes it's all these other things. So you got to learn how to really like disengage that parking brake so that you're not giving your spouse all this pressure. Right.
But also on the opposite side, I feel like I hear, they make it into all these jokes, but saying you're tired 99% of the time, then maybe you should be addressing why you're tired, right?
Oh, right. Oh, and tired means different things. Ever been tired and then you got a call or a text from a friend you haven't heard from in a long time, and all of a sudden you have this energy because you want to catch up with them, right? Wait, I thought you were tired, but no, you have time for them, and you didn't spend 3 hours, talking with them and catching up. So, right, when you say you're there are times when you are physically exhausted, and let's be realistic. It's not going to be a great experience, even if you engage sexually. But sometimes you use tired as an excuse because you don't want to engage, because it'll take some effort. But
Right.
in a different context, you could be at the same level of tired and find a second wind. So can you make sex be so exciting that even if you have to wake up in 4 hours from now, you don't want to turn it down because it's going to be so good?
Right.
That's where you want to get to.
Yeah, I love that. Husband doesn't like the same thing that the wife likes. How do they get on the same page? I feel like we kind of touched on this a little bit. When we ask for our spouse to do things that we think they might look at us strange or that we're weird, or how do we do that? But how do we work on, things that you don't like that your spouse wants to do?
Yeah. Using the food analogy before, like it's really unrealistic for two people to have the same appetite for the same foods at the same time all the time. You might be married to someone that really likes sushi and you hate sushi. Or you might be married to someone that can eat pizza for the rest of their life and be perfectly content. And you're like, no, I cannot do greasy pizza at all, right? So it's unrealistic for you and your spouse to like the same things. And sometimes your spouse is going to be really into gross things, or your spouse is going to be a total pervert. So things he or she might want, right? So first thing to just be clear on, if it's a hard no, it's a hard no. Like, you can set boundaries, and just because your spouse wants it doesn't give them a free pass. But that being said, part of being a good partner and being a good spouse is being willing to tolerate some discomfort for your spouse's sake. There are certain things that I like that my wife does not like, but she will do them because she knows it means a lot to me. Or at first she doesn't like them, and then she's grown to like them later. And likewise, the other way around, there's some things my spouse likes that I don't, but I'm willing to tolerate some of that discomfort because I care about her, because I love her. And so it becomes kind of a loving gift in a way. And it's something that we both kind of learn to grow into together. I may not always like it at the same level she does, but it is something that we're both working towards. And she feels it. She knows it. It's coming from my heart. Sometimes we let our discomforts and our anxieties run the marriage. They're in the driver's seat of the marriage. And if your anxiety and your discomforts are driving your marriage, you're going to have a very uninteresting, a very limited marriage. You're going to hit a ceiling on the limit of your capacity for intimacy very quickly. So good partners learn to really push through their anxieties. Yes, I am uncomfortable doing this, but I'm going to push myself through it because I know it's for my growth. I'm going to do it for me because I know this is how I grow. Sex is a people growing machine. It's God's brilliant strategy to grow up people. And sex is always a symptom of something more. It helps you really grow up, to challenge you to expand who you are more than you are today. And it'll never end, even to the day you die. It'll always keep growing you, expanding you, if you let it. So it'll require stepping outside your comfort zone sometimes, but you do it for the sake of building a good relationship.
Right. And do you find that, like with food, the food analogy, it's like maybe you think you don't want to try or think that sounds weird, and you've been told that that's maybe just borderline pornography, whatever they be. But unless you try a bite, you really don't know if you like it or not. So you have to definitely keep an open mind to at least hearing what they have to say about what they'd like to try, and maybe going slow and giving it a shot one time
or two or three times. Yeah.
Because a lot of times we try food and we don't like it the first time. My kids are very picky eaters, so I have lots of experience with this. But maybe, like you were saying, over the course of time, you actually find, well, this isn't quite as bad as I had built it up to be in my mind. Or the opposite, you find that you really don't enjoy it, but you at least gave it a shot, and now it's like you have table space to say, okay, I've tried it a couple times. I gave it my best shot, but I'm really, really not enjoying it. And this is a hard no for me.
Yeah, great. At least you've come with a heart, a full heart
Yeah.
at it. And you're not letting your anxiety run your marriage. That's the thing.
Yes. Okay, wife feels like the romance and the spontaneity after kids is pretty non-existent. What are ways to feel like it's not just checking off another thing on the to-do list?
I've been there. Uh-huh.
Yeah, well, and it's hard when you do have kids and you feel like you don't have the same amount of time anymore that you used to have when you were no kids
Mhm.
and it was just the two of you, or even the dating aspect of like before you even married. I know a lot of married couples that are like, well, he doesn't ever try to set up the date night. I'm the one getting the babysitter. I'm the one getting the dinner reservations. Like, it's not just the sex aspect of it either. It's like the whole kit and caboodle of like just not feeling like there's any effort being put into dating and pursuing anymore. And
Mhm.
like, how do you bring that up without hurting the other spouse's feelings? Because you don't want to make them feel like they're not doing enough, right?
Uh-huh. Well, if they're not doing enough, you need to address it. And you might hurt your spouse's feelings sometimes. I'm not saying you'd be a bully and take pleasure in hurting your spouse's feelings, but sometimes we're too afraid to bring up real issues in our marriage out of a fear of how our spouse might react. Instead, we need to remember how they respond is their responsibility, but you need to do your part to really, you're standing up for something better, right? You're
Yes.
advocate. This is advocacy. This is, I want a better marriage for us. So stand up for it. And yeah, they might get upset, but give them space to let them kind of deal with it. Some of the best coaches or mentors I've ever had sometimes tell me news I don't want to hear, but I know they're doing it from a good place because they care and they're invested in me, and they're right. And I do need to change. I need to shape up. And spouses can do that for each other, and it can be a great way to elevate your marriage. So if that's you, you gotta you're gonna hurt. We hurt our kids by taking them to get shots for immunizations, right? We go to a dentist and it hurts to get a filling filled, but in the long run, it's for the good. So a little bit of discomfort for the growth of the relationship, if you look at it that way, is always going to be good. About kids, um, it's like, let's be realistic though. Like, the kids are going to run your family. They have all the control in your family dynamic because their needs come first, and you are the primary caregiver, and it'd be very wrong to neglect them. So we're not going to neglect our children. But that being said, anything of value in life does take effort. So, and there's always going to be enough time for the things that you do truly care about. So if you prioritize sex and connection, it's going to happen. But I think the question here is more about like the romance. So years into our marriage, my wife and I got into our rut and our routine. I was working a lot. And even though I'm at home, I'm not really mentally home. I'm present. I'm always thinking about work and whatever. And then we had our transformation a few years ago where that's when she's like, hey, I need you to be more, present at home. And I started changing my ways a bit. And then that's when our sex and intimacy just really started to take off more. Around that time, I had forgotten all the romantic things I used to do. Before we were married, I remember waking up really early, driving over to her house and putting like a note on her windshield of her car and then driving off without her knowing. So when she came out in the morning, there was a note from me like, hey, I just hope you have a good day. Like, I used to do little things like that. Or I used to get so elaborate and creative with our date nights. I'd make treasure hunts. I'd do like a themed date, like a pirate themed date where everything we did had something to do with pirates or whatever. I used to like get really into these things, and I had forgotten that I used to do that.
Yeah.
And so now that we're in this new transition, or we're rediscovering each other in our marriage again, it's like, oh yeah, I remember I used to do those things. All of a sudden, like the romance that came back because I
Yeah.
prioritized it now. Like then I'd, hide little notes for her to find in interesting places. I'd get really creative on the dates too. And I would really step up my game to romance her, play romantic songs while I do dishes and sing to her or whatever it is I know that she likes to do. We go do dance classes, things that she really liked and I like too. And that will come, but you really, if you prioritize it and really make it happen, like put your mind to it.
Yeah. I love that. When we were dating, my husband sent me a care package that had, this is going to age me, but instead of a mixed tape, it was like a mixed CD, because
Yeah.
we had upgraded to CDs at that point. And I remember playing that CD, oh my goodness, over and over. And every song, it was like just, this romantic love song. And I mean, I was just,
Backstreet Boys or something like that.
I mean, all the classics, you name it, and it was on there. But the thought, just something so simple, but just the thought of, those songs. Now, every time I hear those songs, I think of the fact that he had made me that mixed CD. And so those things, I think we forget how just simple it really is, but how much it can affect your spouse for years. Every time they hear that song now, they think of that mixed CD, and we don't burn CDs anymore, but
Right.
just sending them a song that's like, hey, I heard this song, it reminded me of you and it put a smile on my face, I hope you have a good day. Like it could be as simple as that, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay, this one, struggling with intimacy after years of infertility. How to overcome that struggle.
Yeah, infertility is hard. And I know several couples in this situation, and it's really hard. Sex can feel really mechanical. It feels like a negative experience because it's like, how come this just doesn't work for us? So my heart goes out to people that deal with that. That can be really, really hard. And there are professionals that, they are specialized and trained specifically to help couples, keep the spark and romance alive through years of infertility. So I'm not one of those, but there are definitely, it's a big enough problem that there's training for individuals to help people through that.
Yeah.
My advice is just to make sure you set aside sexy dates where the whole focus is just on pleasure only, not reproduction. So it might mean no intercourse even. Let's just see what touch feels good and let's play with that. And this might include, using some toys, or let's do a day spa, or this might be, let's just read a romance novel or watch a movie together and just really enjoy arousal for arousal's sake. And remember that there's this part of our marriage too.
Yeah, I love that. That's so good. So the next question I have is, they are not feeling attracted to their partner anymore. And is that, here we go again, I'm
normal?
putting my marks up in the air. Is that normal?
I don't know. Was it one of Newton's laws of the universe? Is the law of entropy? Things go from a higher level of order to a lower level of order if you give it enough time, like organization to disorganization. And I think that's what's happening in this relationship. You just let the natural course of nature take over and decay the intimacy in your relationship. So anything that's of value takes effort. If you think of, and some risk too, like climbing Mount Everest, I don't know, space flight, like all these things take enormous amounts of effort and dedication. Your marriage is no different. And I think you probably have some marriage neglect in this case. When you're not feeling attracted, I just remember that it's all has to do with our thoughts. It's impossible to have a feeling without a thought that accompanies it, if you think about it. So feeling attracted to the person that wrote this question makes it sound like, because I'm not feeling attracted, I'm not engaged in my relationship anymore. But they forget that as if the feeling of attraction kind of exists outside of them, like it's acting on them, as if it's kind of like a sensation that happens, and then we fall in love. But that's really not how it works. In fact, when you're first dating, you have you employ a lot of thoughts that make you attracted to your spouse, but it's easier then because there's a lot of novelty in the relationship. You see a lot of They see a lot of the good in you. You're like, yeah, this is a good person because they see how good I am. Finally, somebody sees me for how good I am.
Yeah.
Right? There's a lot of that, like it feels so validating. And then once you get married, you realize that that validation, if you depend on it to always come from your spouse, because you can't validate yourself, it's going to be harder and harder for you to have those thoughts that evoke feelings of attraction towards your partner. So the solution is multifold. It's to validate yourself. I am good enough. I am pretty enough. I know regardless of what I do, what I look like, how I am, God loves me the same. I have infinite value and worth. Like those things, when you can stand on your own 2 feet solidly without needing to lean on your partner to kind of prop you up emotionally, that's when you can like start being more in the control position for your thoughts. Then you can decide, and this is the other part, like start thinking the thoughts that are attractive. Start thinking the thoughts that you used to have that attracted you to your spouse in the first place, and replay it. And just remember that marriage really is a people growing machine, and you need to push yourself to love another person, even when it's harder to love. Just because you don't feel attracted in this moment doesn't mean you withdraw your love. There are times when it's going to be really hard to love your spouse. And I think this is what Jesus teaches in the Sermon on the Mount. Like when he says to turn the other cheek, he's not saying accept abuse. What he's saying is, can you love a person that doesn't love you? Like when they sue you at the coat, give them your cloak also. Can you do good to those that despitefully use you? And like even the publicans and sinners, they can love people that love them. But how about you? Can you love people that are hard to love sometimes? That's the challenge, and that's what marriage requires of us many times to do. So you may not feel attracted because you're not thinking those thoughts. So change your thoughts. And remember, part of marriage is growing up. Can I learn how to love a person that may be hard to love sometimes?
So true. And remember that you're hard to love sometimes too.
Yeah, it goes both ways. Yep.
Definitely goes both ways. Oh man. This last question I feel like we've kind of covered. But basically, they're talking about kids' schedules are putting a major damper on their sex life. So busy all day. And when they finally get to bed, they both collapse, just being exhausted.
Yes. Yep. I have 6 kids of all age ranges. And yeah, I've totally been there. I feel so tired. I have nothing left to give. I just remember, I think, in the end, there's always enough time for the things that you really care about.
Yeah.
And I've seen couples make major shifts in their life and their lifestyle to prioritize time to each other. Like they cut out one of the kids' activities. Like, okay, the kid was overscheduled anyway with all the things. So they just cut one thing out. And that all of a sudden, like during the pandemic, do you remember how families were like, oh, we're a family again. We don't have soccer practice, ballet, or baseball. Like we can actually like spend time together, like, right? So sometimes cutting out something, you can rediscover each other again. I've seen couples where they'd get a different job just so that they have a shorter commute so they can have more family time or more time, or they just learn how to get coaching or whatever. They get more efficient at meal planning at home, or they get more efficient at shopping, or get more efficient at running the household. So things are more automatic. So you're not having to make so many decisions. So you're not facing decision fatigue by the end of the day. So you can get smarter at the way you do life. And that does help. I just remember that children are a priority and they do control the family. It's realistically, it'd be wrong to neglect your children, and they do deserve your attention, but they don't need to exhaust you. You can set boundaries. For instance, in our home, we lock our bedroom pretty much every night at 9:30. That's like our time. It's 9:30. You need to be in bed anyway.
Yes.
So that's us. And we lock the door, and that's our time. So like you can set boundaries that help with kids. And I do got to say, it does get easier when the kids get older. They're a little more self-sufficient, but you got to teach them how to be self-sufficient. Like our kids all know how to make breakfast. Not that we make them make breakfast all the time. I still, my wife makes breakfast or whatever, but they can make themselves breakfast. They can dress themselves. They can, they can wake themselves up. They know how to set an alarm clock. We've done these things to kind of train them to be self-sufficient. At age appropriately and ability appropriately. And that takes a lot of pressure off of us so that Emily and I can be a couple as well.
That's great. There's a part on your app where you have images that you can send to your spouse.
Yes.
One of my favorite ones is tonight's curfew is 10 p.m. I'm locking the door. Like, you better be in here, you know? And I thought that was so clever. And it was perfect for the person that was like, my husband's, working until midnight and then I'm falling asleep. I'm like, you need to send them this picture and say like, tomorrow night there's a curfew. And if you're not in here, you're going to be missing out, dude.
I like that. That's a good one.
Another reason why people should download your app.
Yeah, definitely curfew.
Well, I think we did it. We have made it through
Woo!
all the questions. That was a lot of amazing content. And I just want to thank you so much for your wisdom and your vulnerability to share all of these answers with our audience and with your audience. And I really hope that, really one of these questions just like hits home for someone and it's able to encourage them and feel like they're not alone, that their marriage is savable, that they can get back on the right track, and that it's exciting. It can be really exciting to feel like, okay, we got this. It's not too late to turn the corner and to make better decisions and to, get on the same page or the same sheet,
If you do it on the sheet, that is.
Yeah, exactly. Or bathrooms,
Yep.
So
or
again,
airport.
Exactly. Thank you so much for your time today, Dan. I really, really appreciate it.
Great. Thank you.
We hope that you enjoyed this episode of Get Your Marriage On. And if you did, we would love it if you would take a few seconds to give us a rating on iTunes and to share the show with your friends. They'll thank you for life. Once you've done that, you can head over to getyourmarriageon.com for more resources about today's topic and to download our amazing marriage apps. Now go get your marriage on.